By 10:15 in the morning, it was already over. The bomb had been thrown. It had missed. The man who threw it had swallowed poison, jumped into a river, and been dragged out alive because the river was only 4 inches deep. The target, a 50-year-old Archduke in a powder blue uniform, was sitting in the town hall of Sarajevo, unharmed, furious, alive. The assassination had failed. 6 young men with pistols and grenades had been scattered through the crowd that morning, and every single one of them had let their moment pass. The heir to the largest empire in Europe was going to go home. That should have been the end of it. A near miss, a footnote, a story an old man tells his grandchildren about the day someone tried to kill the Archduke and bungled it. Instead, over the next 45 minutes, a series of small human mistakes, a message that didn't get passed along, a route nobody cancelled, a driver who was never told the plan had changed, would line up one behind the other like doors swinging open down a long hallway. And at the end of that hallway stood a 19-year-old boy who had already given up, who thought he'd missed his chance, who was standing on the wrong street, at the wrong moment, for reasons that had nothing to do with him. And then a car turned the corner. Here's the thing that keeps me up at night about this story. 17 million people would die because of what happened in the next 60 seconds. And almost none of it had to happen at all. One wrong turn that started World War I. Let's set the scene, because the scene matters more than anyone tells you. It's Sunday, June 28, 1914, Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia, a province the Austro-Hungarian Empire had swallowed up just 6 years earlier, over the loud objections of the Serbs who lived there and the Kingdom of Serbia next door. The date is not an accident. June 28th is Vidovdan, St. Vitus's Day, the most sacred day in the Serbian calendar, the anniversary of a battle in 1389, where the Serbs lost their independence to the Ottomans. For a Serbian nationalist, watching an Austrian Archduke parade through your city on that day would feel like an insult carved directly into your bones. And the Archduke came anyway. Franz Ferdinand, heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary, nephew of the ancient Emperor Franz Joseph, came to Sarajevo to watch army maneuvers and show the flag. He brought his wife, Sophie, and that detail alone tells you something about the man that history usually forgets. Because Franz Ferdinand was not supposed to be happy, he'd married Sophie Chotek, a countess, but not royal enough for the Habsburg court, and the emperor had punished him for it. Their marriage was declared morganatic. That's a cold word for a cruel arrangement. Sophie could be his wife, but she could never be empress. Their children could never inherit the throne, and at official ceremonies in Vienna, she was forbidden to sit near him, ride in his carriage, or share his box at the opera. She had to walk behind the youngest archduchess for 14 years. The woman he loved had been humiliated in public by his own family. But out here, in the provinces, on a military inspection, the rigid rules of Vienna relaxed. Out here, Sophie could ride beside him. She could sit next to him in the open car and take his arm and be treated, for once, like his wife. And so June 28, 1914, the day he would die, was also, by the calendar, close to their 14th wedding anniversary. He'd brought her along partly, so that for a few days she could be at his side in public without shame. Sit with that for a second. The reason Sophie was in that car at all, the reason she died beside him, is that it was one of the only places in the empire where her husband was allowed to love her openly. Now hold that image, because we're about to walk through the doors. The security that morning was, to put it gently, insane, or rather, the lack of it was. There were around 120,000 people in Sarajevo. The governor of Bosnia, a man named Oskar Potiorek, had roughly 120 police officers on duty. The army was in the hills on maneuvers and was not lining the streets. The Archduke's route had been printed in the newspapers in advance. His car would drive slowly, top down, along a wide open boulevard beside the river, the Apple Quay, so the crowds could see him. If you wanted to design a day for an assassin, you could not do better than this, and the assassins knew it. There were, depending on how you count. 6 or 7 of them, most of them tubercular teenagers, armed by a shadowy Serbian secret society, positioned in a line along the Apple Quay. The plan was brutally simple. As the motorcade rolled past, each man would get his chance. If one failed, the next would try. It was an assembly line of murder, and Franz Ferdinand had to drive straight through all of it. The first assassin froze. He had a bomb in his coat and a clear shot and a policeman standing near him. And he did nothing, he said later. He didn't want to hurt Sophie. The car rolled on. The second man did not freeze. His name was Nedeljko Vabranovia. As the Archduke's car approached, he knocked the cap off a grenade against a lamppost. These were bombs with a 10-second fuse, and he threw it straight at the open car. And here is the first door. The grenade was a good throw. It should have landed in Franz Ferdinand's lap. But a 10-second fuse is a long time, and the car was moving, and the Archduke, or his driver, accounts differ, saw the dark object flying toward them. Somebody's arm went up. The bomb was deflected. It bounced off the folded-down roof of the convertible, rolled into the street behind, and detonated under the next car in the motorcade. The explosion tore into the following vehicle. It wounded around 20 people, officers, spectators, a countess in the crowd, and it badly injured Lieutenant Colonel Erich von Maritzi, one of Potiorek's own men. Shrapnel sprayed the pavement. Smoke rose over the quay. It was chaos, but Franz Ferdinand and Sophie were untouched, not a scratch. Vabranovia swallowed his cyanide capsule and threw himself over the railing into the Miljarska River to escape the crowd. The cyanide was old and only made him vomit. The river, in the dry heat of late June, was barely ankle deep. He landed in the mud and was seized by the mob and the police and beaten before he could be arrested. The great romantic suicide of a revolutionary, a man drowning in 4 inches of water, throwing up expired poison, while a crowd kicks him. I want you to notice what has just happened, because everyone rushes past it. The assassination has already failed. The bomb missed. The one man who acted is in custody. The other conspirators, further down the line, watched the explosion and the police swarm and lost their nerve. One after another, the Archduke's car did not stop. It accelerated. It sped down the Apple Quay at high speed, straight past the remaining assassins, and delivered Franz Ferdinand safely to the town hall. The most dangerous stretch of road was behind him. The plot was in ruins. If the story ended here, it would be a story about a bad day that turned out fine. A day when the Empire got lucky. But somebody had been wounded on that quay, and Franz Ferdinand was about to make a decision, a decent, human, honorable decision, that would kill him. At the town hall, the mayor of Sarajevo, who had prepared a warm welcome speech and apparently had not been told there'd just been a bombing, began reading his flowery greeting aloud. Franz Ferdinand cut him off. "I come here as your guest," he snapped, "and your people greet me with bombs." Sophie leaned over and whispered something to him. He calmed down. He let the mayor finish. Then he gave his own short speech. The pages, according to some accounts, still spattered with the blood of a wounded aide. And then came the question of what to do next. The safe thing, the obvious thing, was to leave, cancel the rest of the program, get the Archduke and his wife out of Sarajevo immediately, on the fastest possible road, and never come back. There were still armed men in that city. Everyone in that room knew the day had nearly ended in blood. But Franz Ferdinand didn't want to run. He wanted to go to the hospital and visit the officers who'd been wounded by the bomb that had been meant for him. Colonel Maritzi was lying injured because a grenade had bounced off the Archduke's car. Franz Ferdinand felt responsible. He wanted to see him. This is door 2, and I think it's the most human door of them all, because there was nothing foolish about it. It was the choice of a man with a conscience. The people around him didn't fight it hard enough. Someone raised the danger. Someone suggested that if they were going out again, soldiers should line the route, and Governor Potiorek, the man responsible for security, the man whose city this was, brushed it off. "Do you think Sarajevo is full of assassins?" He's supposed to have said. It's one of the great bitter lines in history, because the answer was, yes, it was. There was at least one still standing on the street, and he had a loaded pistol. So the decision was made. They would drive to the hospital to see the wounded, and to keep the Archduke safe, Potiorek made one sensible change to the plan. They would not weave back through the narrow streets of the city centre as originally scheduled. They would go straight down the wide, open Apple Quay, the same fast boulevard they'd just used, all the way to the hospital. Fewer corners, fewer crowds, fewer places for a man to step out of a doorway. It was, on paper, the careful choice. There was only one problem with the careful choice. Nobody told the drivers. This is the door that historians argue about, and it's the one that turns a tragedy into something almost unbearable, because door 3 is not a bullet or a bomb. Door 3 is a communication failure, the most ordinary thing in the world. The new plan existed. Potiorek knew it. The senior officers knew it. Straight down the Apple Quay to the hospital. Do not turn into the city. But somewhere between the decision being made inside the town hall and the motorcade pulling away outside, the instruction never reached the men who actually needed it, the drivers at the front of the line. Leopold Leuker was Franz Ferdinand's chauffeur. He was driving a girth and stiffed open touring car, a beautiful dark machine, and he was following the car in front of him, and the car in front of him was following the original, printed, published route, the one from the morning, the one everybody had memorized, the one that turned off the Apple Quay and up Franz Joseph Street into the heart of the old town. Think about how quietly this fails. There's no dramatic moment. No one shouts the message didn't get through. The motorcade simply starts moving. The lead cars roll along the quay, and at the corner where Franz Joseph Street meets the river, the front car does exactly what it was told to do that morning. It turns right, off the wide safe boulevard, into the narrow street, and Leuker, driving the Archduke, sees the car ahead turn, and does the natural thing. He turns too. If a single officer had leaned out of a window and shouted the change down the line, if one man had run to the lead driver and said straight ahead, "Don't turn," Franz Ferdinand's car sails past the corner and down the open quay to the hospital. Princip never gets his shot. There is, quite possibly, no First World War as we know it. But the message never arrived, and the car turned onto Franz Joseph Street, and of all the streets in Sarajevo, of all the corners in the city, this was the one where a 19-year-old boy was standing, having given up hope, believing he had already failed. His name was Gavrilo Princip. He was 19 years old. He was small, thin, sick with the tuberculosis that would eventually kill him in prison. He'd been rejected by the Serbian army, partly because he was too frail. He was a passionate, half-educated, deadly serious young nationalist who believed that killing this Archduke would free the South Slavs from the Austrian Empire. And on that morning, he had already lost his chance. Princip had been one of the assassins strung out along the Apple Quay when Vabrinovia threw the bomb and the whole thing collapsed into chaos. When the police swarmed and the Archduke's car raced away untouched, Princip's opportunity evaporated with everyone else's. The target was gone, safe inside the town hall. The plot had failed. Princip drifted off the quay and into the side streets. And here's the detail that the whole world thinks it knows and gets wrong. You've heard it. You've probably repeated it. The story goes that Gavrilo Princip, disappointed, went to buy a sandwich, that he wandered into a delicatessen called Schiller's, bought himself a bite to eat, and was standing there chewing when, by the most absurd luck imaginable, the Archduke's car happened to turn the corner right in front of him. The whole 20th century, the story says, turned on a sandwich. It's a perfect story. It's clean. It's ironic. It's darkly funny. History teachers love it. It's been in books and documentaries and 1,000 internet lists. And there is essentially no evidence that it's true. We'll come back to the sandwich, because it deserves its own reckoning. For now, hold on to the part we can actually verify. Gavrilo Princip, a failed assassin, was standing on the pavement of Franz Joseph Street, near the corner, near Schiller's Delicatessen. He was in that spot for a simple reason. Because Franz Joseph Street was on the original route, he had positioned himself along the path the Archduke was supposed to take all along. He wasn't there by magic. He was there because he'd stationed himself on the correct road. And then the target had escaped, and he was left standing on a road the target was no longer supposed to use, which is the cruelest irony of the entire day. Princip was standing in exactly the right place to kill Franz Ferdinand. If only the Archduke had stuck to the plan the assassins knew about. The route change was supposed to save the Archduke's life by taking him away from the streets the killers were watching. And then the wrong turn and did the route change and dropped him right back onto the one street where a killer was still waiting. The safety measure and the fatal mistake cancelled each other out, and a 19-year-old boy looked up from the pavement and could not believe what he was seeing. The Archduke's car, turning onto his street, slowing down, coming straight toward him. Now everything happens in seconds, so let's slow it all the way down, because the final door is the one that seals the rest. Loika's car turns off the Apple Key onto Franz Joseph Street, the wrong turn, and it has gone only a few yards when Governor Potiorek, sitting in the car, realizes what's happening. This is not the way. They're supposed to be going straight down the quay to the hospital. He leans forward and calls out to the driver. Some accounts render it as stop. You're going the wrong way. Or this is the wrong way. We're supposed to take the Apple Key. And Loika, the chauffeur, does what any driver does when the governor tells him he's made a mistake in a car carrying the heir to the empire. He hits the brakes, the car stops, and then, because Franz Joseph Street is narrow, and there's no room to turn around, Loika begins the slow, awkward process of putting the car in reverse to back out onto the quay. The girth and stiff didn't have a modern gearbox. Reversing it was a clumsy, halting maneuver. The engine, in some accounts, stalls. The car sits there, stationary, exposed, its top folded down. The Archduke and his wife sitting up in plain view. No longer a fast-moving target racing past, but a parked car, motionless, on a quiet side street. 5 feet away stands Gavrilo Princip. He can't believe his luck, and he almost doesn't take the shot. Some accounts say he hesitated at the sight of Sophie, but the moment is too perfect. He steps forward. He raises the pistol, a small Browning automatic. He's so close he later says he turned his head away as he fired. That he didn't even aim. 2 shots. The first bullet hits Sophie in the abdomen. The second hits Franz Ferdinand in the neck, severing his jugular vein. For a moment, no one even realizes they've been hit. They both sit upright. Sophie slumps against her husband. Franz Ferdinand, blood pouring from his mouth, turns to her and speaks, and his last words are not about empires, or war or Serbia. They are about her. Sophie, Sophie, don't die. Stay alive for our children. She was already gone, or nearly. He died within minutes. They left behind 3 children, who would grow up orphans, and 2 of whom, decades later, would be sent by the Nazis to the concentration camp at Dachau. One final cruelty in a story already drowning in them. Gavrilo Princip turned the gun on himself, but the crowd grabbed his arm. He swallowed his cyanide. Like his comrades, it failed, and only made him sick. He was 19, too young, under Austro-Hungarian law, to be executed. He was sentenced to 20 years, and died in prison of tuberculosis in 1918. His skeletal body wasted to under 100 pounds. Having lived just long enough to see the war, his bullet started grind through its 4th and final year. 2 shots, 60 seconds, and now count the doors again with me, because this is the part that gets me. Before we count the doors, we have to deal with the sandwich, because if you've heard this story before, the sandwich is probably the part you remember, and I need to be honest with you about it, because getting the small things right is the whole point. The legend, as it's usually told, Princip, dejected after the failed bombing, ducked into Schiller's Delicatessen, bought a sandwich, and was eating it on the sidewalk when fate delivered the Archduke's car to his doorstep. The First World War, the story goes, hinged on a man's snack. It's irresistible. It's been taught in classrooms, printed in serious books, and repeated across the internet millions of times. Here's what the historical record actually shows. At Princip's trial, and in the testimony of the eyewitnesses questioned afterward, there is no mention of a sandwich. Princip never said he bought one. No witness described him eating anything. The delicatessen was real. Schiller's stood right there on the corner. But the sandwich itself appears nowhere in the contemporary evidence. So where did it come from? As far as historians who've traced it can tell, the sandwich detail seems to have entered the popular story remarkably late. It gained its worldwide fame from a television docudrama broadcast in the early 2000s, which dramatized Princip standing outside the delicatessen, and from there it spread like wildfire, exactly because it was such a good story, a tidy piece of fiction dressed up as a fact. Repeated so many times, it hardened into something everyone knows. And I want to be careful here, because this is a case where I'm telling you what the evidence doesn't support rather than claiming certainty about what Princip had for lunch. We can't prove the boy didn't eat something that morning. What we can say that the confident, specific, world turns on a sandwich version has no foundation in the trial records, and it almost certainly grew out of a modern dramatization rather than any 1914 source. Consider this one an open case, filed under myths that were too good to check. But here's the thing, and this is why the sandwich actually matters. When you strip the sandwich away, the story doesn't get less astonishing. It gets more astonishing, because the sandwich was doing a job in the myth. It was the explanation for why Princip happened to be standing on that exact corner. Take the sandwich away, and you're left with the real explanation, which is far stranger. Princip was standing on Franz Joseph Street, because that was the route the assassins had been briefed on. He was in precisely the right spot to kill the Archduke, not by dumb luck, not because of a snack, but because the authorities had changed the route to avoid the assassins. And then a driver, who never got the memo, turned right back onto the killer's original street. You don't need the sandwich, the truth is worse. The safety plan and the fatal error erased each other, and the boy was standing exactly where the plan said the target would be. So let's count the doors, let's walk back down that hallway, and look at every point where this could have, should have, gone the other way. Door 1, the bomb. Labrinovi's grenade was a good throw at close range. If it had a shorter fuse, or if no one had knocked it away, Franz Ferdinand dies at 10 in the morning and there is no wrong turn, because there's no one left to make it. But there's also, arguably, no war in the way we got it, because the political fuse in the summer of 1914, the specific spark it got. Instead the bomb bounced, the Archduke lived, the plot failed, door 1 swung the safe way, and it didn't matter, because of everything that came after. Door 2, the choice to go back. Franz Ferdinand could have fled the city the moment the bomb went off. Every instinct of self-preservation said run. Instead he chose to visit the men wounded in his place. A decent man's decision. If he leaves Sarajevo right then, he lives. The door was open. He walked through it out of conscience, straight toward his death. Door 3, the message. The route was changed to protect him. Straight down the open quay, away from the assassin's streets. It was the right call, and it was never communicated to the drivers. One sentence, passed to one chauffeur, and the car never turns. If any officer that day had done the small, boring thing, confirmed the drivers know the new route, Franz Ferdinand drives to the hospital and home to Vienna, and dies an old man. The door was open. A missing sentence closed it. Door 4, the boy on the street. Princip had already failed. He'd given up. He was standing on Franz Joseph Street only because it was the old route, the very route the Archduke was no longer supposed to take. The route change should have carried the target far away from him. Door 4 should never have connected to anything. Door 5, the stall. The wrong turn alone might not have been enough, but then Potiorek shouted, and Loika braked, and the car stopped, and had to reverse, right in front of Princip, turning a fast-moving target into a stationary one at point-blank range. If the car keeps rolling, If the driver doesn't stop to reverse, Princip may never get a clean shot at a moving vehicle. The stall held the door open just long enough. 5 doors, and every single one of them is human. Not one is fate. A deflected bomb, a conscience, a message left unsaid, a route nobody cancelled, a driver told to stop at the worst possible instant. Remove any one of them, any single one, and the most likely outcome is that Franz Ferdinand goes home alive, and the summer of 1914 calls instead of catching fire. Here's what I think. We tell this story as if it were destiny, as if the war were a boulder already rolling downhill in Sarajevo just the moment it became visible. And there's truth in that. Europe in 1914 was a room soaked in gasoline. The alliances, the arms race, the imperial rivalries, the mutual paranoia of great powers, all of it was real, and something was probably going to set it off eventually. But the way I see it, that's exactly what makes the wrong turn so haunting, not less, because the gasoline doesn't light itself. It needed a match, and the match was this specific murder of this specific man on this specific day, the assassination that gave Austria-Hungary the pretext to crush Serbia, that pulled in Russia, then Germany, then France, then Britain, until the whole continent was at war within 5 weeks. A different spark, a week later or a year later, might have produced a different war, or a smaller one, or a crisis that fizzled the way a dozen earlier crises had fizzled. We will never know. That's the open case at the center of the 20th century, and no historian can close it. What we do know is that the specific catastrophe we got, the 4 years, the trenches, the 17 million dead, the empires that fell, the second, even worse war that grew out of the wreckage of the first, that specific catastrophe threw a 19-year-old boy on a street corner who only got his chance because a driver made a wrong turn and a governor told him to stop. There's a detail I keep returning to. The car that Franz Ferdinand died in still exists. You can go and see it in a museum in Vienna, and on its license plate is a number that people have pointed to for 100 years as the strangest coincidence of all, a 3118. Read as a date, some say. It reads like Armistice Day, the 11th of November 18, the 11th of November 1918. The day the war that started in that car finally ended. It's almost certainly just a coincidence, a trick of pattern hungry minds reading meaning into a random plate. I don't believe the universe was leaving us a message, but I'll tell you what I do believe. I believe that a decent man went back to visit the wounded, and it killed him. I believe a message that would have taken 10 seconds to pass along was never passed, and that silence killed millions. I believe that history's hinges are almost never grand, that they are small, human, forgettable things, a stalled engine, a wrong turn, a sentence nobody said out loud. Franz Ferdinand's last words were Sophie, stay alive for our children. He wasn't thinking about empires or Serbia or the balance of power in Europe. He was thinking about his wife and his kids, just a man, bleeding in a car, on a street he was never supposed to be on. Read that again, and then remember how close, how absurdly, agonizingly close, the whole thing came to simply not happening at all. If this story got to you the way it gets to me, do me a favor and hit subscribe. This channel lives on the near misses of history, the moments the whole world balanced on a coin toss and fell the wrong way. And if you want to see another day that turned on a single terrible piece of luck, watch the video on screen now. I'll see you at the next door.